Hello, this is Susan Ritchie, bringing you the story of the last remaining large tract of coastal property in the city of Santa Barbara, commonly called the Wilcox property. Many people, walkers, bikers, nature lovers, and students, artists, and yes, hang gliders, have been enjoying the 70-acre bluff top for years. And now that the property owners are proposing to build on the site, a groundswell of people have arisen who are working hard to purchase the property so it can remain as it is, a piece of coastal landscape for the most part untouched by the rush for housing and industry. Registered voters of the city of Santa Barbara will have the chance to decide on the fate of this property in November when they vote on Measure M. So let's take a look at what is here, why some people would like to save it, what it will cost to buy and maintain it, and what will happen if Santa Barbarans don't buy it. This is what most of us know of the Wilcox property. We notice an oak-covered hillside as we drive down Las Positas to Cliff Drive. We gaze at steep bluffs next to the stream outlet as we lounge at Arroyo Burro Beach. Or we note the undulating shale cliffs as we amble or run east along the beach. To see more of the property, let's take a little armchair field trip with two botanists in our community, Ralph Philbrick and Wayne Farron. Ralph Philbrick is a retired director of the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden and now does consulting. Wayne Farron runs the herbarium at UCSB and has become a specialist on local wetlands.
Here we have a fairly extensive area which brings together some different biological communities. It's inside the city and it's right next to the ocean. And you just don't have another piece of property like this.
It's the ecosystem of Arroyo Burro that is important, and Wilcox is a portion of that, a very important portion. Preservation of it would form a foundation for the preservation of an ecosystem that is endangered throughout our area because of excess development. And also, being part within the city boundaries of Santa Barbara, there's important stewardship that should be part of the city planning, and that its remaining natural areas should be protected and planned for since there are so few left.
Looking at a map Ralph Philbrick helped prepare, we see the Wilcox property next to the ocean in Arroyo Burro Beach. On the north slope of the mesa, we have an old oak forest. The trees with the red X's would be cut if the proposed development occurs. Growing here are the California rose and a plant the California Native Plant Society lists as needing special protection, Plummer's baccharis. Plummer's baccharis grows only in Santa Barbara County and a little into Ventura and San Luis Obispo counties. On the south slope, we have the coastal bluff, where grow the California sunflower and lemonade berry, and a host of plants which are helping retard erosion. On the top of the mesa, we have the coastal terrace, inhabited by a variety of native plants and some species introduced when the Wilcox nursery was here over 20 years ago. The oaks, which probably grew here and were logged, are reseeding themselves as the property goes untended by people.
Wetlands in the Santa Barbara area have been impacted by development. There has been development along stream banks, in estuaries, and in much of Southern California, we have reduced 80 to 90% of the wetlands to a few areas that are important for wildlife and have great aesthetic value. Part of the Arroyo Burro ecosystem includes wetlands that are adjacent to the Wilcox property. And in planning for the entire mouth of the Arroyo Burro area, protection of the Wilcox property and eventual restoration of part of the area would enhance the environmental value of wetlands that are important for wildlife, important for the environmental quality of the region. And many of the arroyos in this area have been virtually destroyed because of the lack of planning and excess development in them. We have here within the city boundary about the last chance to protect and enhance an area that has great wildlife and environmental value.
You see people come here to paint, and you see photographers come here to take pictures, and they can appreciate the wetlands too. And the future biologists need to be trained someplace in our community, and these outdoor laboratories, wetlands, terrace, oak woodlands, bluff, and insect sites and so on are very well provided for here too. I think we should keep that in mind.
All of these small areas along the coast, that the few that are remaining, have potentially greater value in the future as development continues along the south coast of Santa Barbara County. With the additional destruction of habitat, each remaining piece becomes more valuable in the future. And with preservation and restoration or enhancement of the Wilcox property, not only will it provide gradual improvement of habitats at the site, but its enhanced value with continued destruction around it will provide for many additional habitats and much more habitat use by migratory birds, resident wildlife, and for important use for mankind as well. So there is its present condition is of concern, but additional restoration and increased value because of local destruction of habitats certainly provides an important future picture for the Wilcox property if it's preserved.
Flying Wilcox in the evening with the sun setting is probably one of the most beautiful things I've ever done. And I think most hang gliders would agree that cliff flying is something special because you don't have to work hard once you're above the trees. You can fly with fingertip control, and there's a feeling of immense tranquility that just seems in keeping with the whole place.
Rick Simpson has come to the Wilcox property many times as a geologist and as a hang glider. He grew up in the wide open spaces of New Zealand, taught in congested London, and has been a geologist at UCSB for 6 years now.
Well, I've come here and I've traveled the length of California over the years running geology field trips. And one thing I find very scary is how quickly the pace of development goes on here. It's quite unlike anything I've ever seen elsewhere. And a beautiful bit of open ground can be gone in 6 months, probably never to come back. And the pace of it just terrifies me. So I think people who live in Santa Barbara should think not just about the next 70 years, but of space for their children and their children's children, and right down the generations. Don't think small. We've got to think for the people coming after us.
As yet, this land does not belong to the public. It is privately owned, currently by Santa Barbara Capital and Invest West, which bought it in 1985 for $4.5 million. Hal Conklin, Santa Barbara City Councilman, knows the story of proposed developments on the Wilcox property.
Now, of course, the park discussion is not a new one. This has been before us for years, and in fact, it was on the ballot in November of 1974. when the voters did, by a majority margin, indicate to the city that they would prefer to see it preserved as a park as opposed to, at that time, a hotel conference center. It, unfortunately, at that time was not a good time for this kind of discussion. Timing is always very important when you're talking about saving property and spending taxpayers' dollars to do it. At that particular time, we were in the midst of the first major oil crisis. Inflation was beginning to dramatically go out of sight. There was a great recession that was going on because of the oil crisis. People were feeling very tight with money. And here we had a developer who had gotten approval for a hotel who was screaming bloody murder, that it would be over his dead body that he would sell this. In fact, because the ballot measure in 1974 did not include a source of funds to buy it, even though the majority of the people said they wanted it bought, the city council 2 weeks later indicated after the vote that they did not have the funds to buy the property. Mr. Toso, who was a partner in the hotel, then sued the city for ruining his project, claiming that he had lost all this money now on the hotel because they had put a cloud over the development. He took that all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. Didn't actually get a hearing at the Supreme Court, but lost. Some years later, by 1979, early 80, the Dayon Corporation proposed a subdivision on the property. It came to the city and got approval for subdivision of some 83 homes, I believe it was. That project was not an actual development project, but strictly a subdivision of land. They went to the Coastal Commission. The project ultimately failed under its own weight and economic structure of the company that was proposing it. That then led to the possible sale of the property to the group that currently is the owner that they wanted to propose this project. As I said earlier, timing is everything, and my first political involvement in the community, which dates back to the early 70s, actually had to do with saving the coastline on the East Beach area of Santa Barbara, what's now the property that Fez Parker owns, and where part of the conference center currently is. I think one of the reasons there had been such a hue and cry against coastal development there dated really back to the 20s, when Pearl Chase, the great matriarch of Santa Barbara, had brought together all of the forces of the community, the business community, the environmental community, the homeowners, in a great effort in the 20s to save the remaining coastline of Santa Barbara. And for the 50 years after that, we've looked to the coastline, East Beach, Palm Park, that's named after her family, and we've lived off that legacy. But we finally reached a point in the 80s where you can't live off that anymore because of the remaining about a little less than 250 acres of open space left on the coast. There's currently now development plans or potential for all the remaining 250 acres, including this property, including the remaining Fez Parker property on the waterfront, including other properties adjacent to Cypress Point here. And we're in the midst of boom times. It's no longer recession time. People are feeling, not only in Santa Barbara, but all over the state, that we're about to lose every last piece of open space we've got to some kind of development. It seemed to me, therefore, that the timing was right to ask the voters once and for all, do you want to save these last pieces of property, or do you want to let them all go? And that led to my writing what's now Measure M, the Pearl Chase Coastal Preservation Bond Act, harking back to the memory of what Pearl Chase did 50 years ago, and asking the voters to make the decision, either save it now or let it all go.
One of the groups of people which has become very active in engendering support for purchasing the Wilcox property is SWAP, Small Wilderness Area Preserves. Sue Higman, a resident of Santa Barbara for 65 years, is president of SWAP.
We came back into the fold in early this year when the Wilcox property was threatened with extensive and intensive development. We thought this was the time to stand up and be counted as the last coastal area in the city limits. We felt it was needed, that we should save it for its own sake. Our purpose really is a wilderness preserve or nature preserve for children of all ages. I like to think that we've been raising the consciousness of the community. We started out by raising the consciousness of the City Council. We felt that in order to preserve this land for all people, for all time, it would have to be purchased from its rightful owners. The Wilcox heirs sold to a group named Santa Barbara Capital, David Grotenhouse and Wayne Siemens, two very nice gentlemen, both of whom graduated from Westmont College. And early on, after SWAP was established, we went to Mr. Grotenhouse and Siemens and proposed that we make an attempt to raise the funds to purchase it and to find out if they were willing to sell. And they were kind, and they said yes, for a price, they would sell. So then we went back and got Hal Conklin of the City Council involved and some of the other people on the City Council now and talked to them. And we have become a constituency in favor of saving the Wilcox. We feel that it's a marvelous nature study area for kids that maybe grow up with nothing but a picture in a book. We'd like to have them come here and see that poison oak really does grow and maybe learn the hard way. And the fact that this area is as natural as any place in the city because it has never been built upon. It was a nursery, and it was used for flowers and so forth. There's still some remnants left in the area. But I invite everyone, come out, see for yourself, see what will be here after we save the park. No, strike that, the preserve.
Measure M is not just for the Wilcox property, but to save Santa Barbara's remaining coastline. A 2/3 yes vote would set up a trust fund to purchase as much of the remaining natural beauty as possible. As Hal Conklin asserts, what makes Santa Barbara unique from other coastal cities like, say, Redondo Beach, Newport Beach, Miami, is that we have natural beauty along the ocean front. We aren't solid hotels or other assorted buildings. Measure M would enable us to save our beauty. The Wilcox property would be the first priority purchase because it is widely appreciated and available. But let's look at the costs of the bond measure and the possible costs of maintaining the Wilcox property. Measure M will cost property owners in Santa Barbara $48.50 per $100,000 assessed value the first year. In succeeding years, the taxes are likely to decrease since overall property values are likely to continue increasing. What about costs for maintaining open space, specifically the Wilcox property? Bob Bronfen, a local architect, talked to the police, fire, and parks departments to find out.
Jerry Ambrose, who was head of the Parks Department, said that he saw very little difference in cost between a natural preserve and a finely manicured bluff-top park, which was proposed being left over from the senior housing development, which is planned for the project. That it would cost about as much money to completely maintain the whole property in a much less complete state than he would if he were just finely manicuring a 40 or 50 or 60-foot wide strip along the bluff. The fire marshal, Mr. McGrew, stated that he also saw very little difference in the relative cost of this property as a preserve compared to what it is right now, or what it has been historically. There are 5 fire hydrants here on the property, which are presently maintained by the fire department and would be continued under their maintenance. They may have to have some roadways improved on the property, but that would depend upon the final plan that was developed, if any, for the property, how many roads there would have to be. But he saw very little difference in the cost of a preserve versus what it has been in the past. Officer Abney, who is the police department's community relations officer, also thought that there would not be a major increase in the cost of policing the area. That historically, before the developers came on the property and placed a caretaker, they would have occasional calls here, and they would have to drop by about one time per shift with the cruiser to see that things were going all right. Having the caretaker here has reduced that considerably. He feels that if there were a caretaker or something like that here, that the preserve would not be a very major change compared to what it had been in the past. He also thought, though, that maybe a portion of the property would have to be fenced where it was accessible to people. I have to be honest, though, in that he said that if there was a senior development project or a retirement project here, that the owner of that project would be responsible for most of the policing or control of that property. That would reduce the city police department's cost for that part of the property. But they would still have to be here for the Blufftop Park and answer calls related to the Blufftop Park. So again, he did not feel that there was a major cost concern in turning the property into a preserve. So we're talking, we don't know absolute dollars because we don't know what it will become. But relatively speaking, we're not talking about a lot of money for continued maintenance and operation of the preserve.
What about the costs to the city if the luxury senior complex goes in? This is harder to estimate, but there are some planners who think the costs for services may be greater over time than the cost of the bond measure. For instance, the Department of Public Works told one inquirer that a new sewage pumping plant would have to be built. But the most strident and frightening cost is the final loss of natural beauty, natural life in our midst, not just for those fortunate enough to make periodic pilgrimages to islands of wilderness. The fear of this loss seems to be what has spurred so many people to make an effort to buy this property. Members of SWAP, who developed a brochure, have put out newsletters and are leading weekend tours. Members of the Coastal Preservation Coalition, raising money, walking precincts. Various scientists donating time, expertise, and money. Hang gliders, a motley individualistic lot which got together to donate money. Talented photographer Inez Roberts, who created a multimedia essay on the Wilcox. Noted local historian Walker Tompkins, who took the time to write a long letter to the news press. Local artists. Arturo Tello organized a Wilcox paint-in where 28 artists painted on the site and raised over $3,000 to contribute from sales. And there are many others who have contributed. Part of the story of the Wilcox property is the bloom of people who have stretched their lives in hopes this mesa can be enjoyed by all forever. ancient Chinese proverb states, if we do not change our direction, we are likely to end up where we are headed. Where Santa Barbarans place their marks on the November ballot, Measure M, will determine which direction we head regarding coastal beauty and local natural lands. And those marks will decide the fate of the Wilcox property.